I opened the wet, unlabeled styrofoam cooler. There was no dry ice inside, just a dozen neatly arranged Polaroid pictures of me asleep. I hadn't even ordered any food that night. It was supposed to be a quiet one. I live on the 14th floor of a high-security building in downtown Chicago. You need a fob to get in the lobby, a fob for the elevator, and the elevator only goes to your specific floor. It's why I pay the ridiculous rent. A massive thunderstorm was tearing up the city, so I'd canceled my dinner plans, ordered a pizza, and settled in. The pizza had arrived 2 hours earlier. Around 10 p.m., my apartment buzzer rang. Not the building intercom, but the buzzer right outside my door. I figured it was my neighbor, Sarah, borrowing milk again. I looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. I opened the door, chain still on. Nothing. Then I looked down. Sitting on my welcome mat was a large medical-grade cooler. The kind you use to transport organs. It was white, sterile, and had no shipping labels. It was just sitting there, dripping rainwater onto the carpet. I should have called security. I should have left it. But I'm an idiot. I thought it was a mistake, maybe a delivery for the hospital a few blocks over. I unhooked the chain, opened the door, and stupidly dragged the heavy thing inside. It was freezing cold to the touch. The second I got it into my kitchen, I smelled it, a faint chemical odor, like formaldehyde and ozone. My curiosity got the best of me. I unlatched the heavy rubber clips on the side. I lifted the lid. That's when I saw them. The Polaroids. A dozen of them, fanned out on the bottom. Me in my bed. Me on my sofa. All taken in the dark, the flash illuminating my sleeping face. In the bottom corner of every single photo, a hand was visible. A hand wearing a tight, black latex glove. In some pictures, the hand was just there. In others, it was inches from my face. In the last, most recent-looking one, a single gloved finger was lightly touching my cheek. I felt the pizza I'd eaten lurch in my stomach. I kicked the cooler, sending it skittering across the tile. The photos scattered, and I saw what was underneath them. It was my cat, Milo. He was curled up, frozen completely solid. His fur was stiff with ice. Someone had tied a little, red bow tie around his neck. I screamed. It wasn't a word, just a raw animal sound. And as I was screaming, my phone, sitting on the counter, lit up. Unknown number. I stared at it, my breath hitched in my throat. It rang once. Twice. On the third ring, I snatched it. "Hello," I whispered. At first, there was only static. Then, I heard a sound that turned my blood to ice. It was my own voice. It was a low, tuneless humming, the stupid, unconscious sound I make when I'm falling asleep. He had recorded me. Then the recording stopped. A new voice, low and cold, whispered into the phone. "Your new gift is in the elevator." The line clicked dead. At that exact second, my apartment buzzer rang again. I knew he was out there. He was right there. I ran to the door, fumbling with my phone, trying to turn on the flashlight. I jammed my eye against the peephole. Nothing. The hallway was empty. But as I watched, the light above the elevator doors across the hall lit up 14. Ding. The elevator doors opened. I couldn't see who was in it, but I didn't need to. I sprinted to the kitchen and grabbed the heaviest thing in my knife block, the 8-inch chef's knife. I crept back to the door, my heart hammering so hard it felt like it was trying to break out of my chest. And then click. All the lights in my apartment went out. The refrigerator whirred into silence. He'd found the breaker box in the hallway. I was in total, pitching blackness, the only light coming from the weak flashlight on my phone. I stood there, shaking in the dark, and I heard it. Scratch. Click. The sound of a key, or a lockpick, sliding into my deadbolt. I didn't run. I couldn't. I just flattened myself against the wall, right behind where the door would swing open. I raised the knife. The lock turned. The door creaked open, pushing into the dark apartment. I saw a silhouette against the dim emergency lighting of the hallway. A tall figure in a dark, glistening raincoat. He stepped inside. I didn't scream. I just lunged. I put all my weight behind the knife, aiming for the center of the dark mass. I hit something solid. There was a grunt, a wet, surprised sound. The figure stumbled forward. I shoved him hard, pushing him back out into the hallway. He tripped over his own feet and went down. I didn't look back. I sprinted in the other direction, slammed my hand into the emergency exit bar, and threw myself into the concrete stairwell. I ran down all 14 flights, not stopping until I burst into the lobby, screaming for the night guard. The guard and I went back up the elevator together. When the doors opened on the 14th floor, the hallway was empty. The breaker box was open, the switch for my unit flipped down. My apartment door was still ajar. There was no man in a raincoat, just a small, dark pool of blood on the hallway carpet, and my chef's knife lying next to it. Inside my apartment, the cooler was gone. The photos were gone. My cat was gone. The building's security footage, of course, was corrupted for that 10-minute window. The elevator camera on my floor had apparently been malfunctioning all week. I moved out the next day. I don't know how he got in. I don't know how he got a key, or how he knew my floor, or how he bypassed the fob system. And I don't know how he took those pictures without me ever waking up. My neighbor's baby monitor wasn't picking up crying. It was picking up an adult man's whisper, clearly reciting my home Wi-Fi password in Russian. This all happened 3 weeks ago. It started with the storm. I live in a townhouse complex, and I was on good terms with my next-door neighbors, Kevin and Lisa. They'd just brought their first baby, Maya, home a few months ago. With the storm raging, a huge oak tree had knocked out the power to our entire block. Kevin and Lisa were out of town, visiting her family in Ohio. My phone buzzed around 11 p.m. It was Lisa. She sounded strained. "Hey," she said, her voice crackling. "I know this is a crazy ask, but we forgot the receiver for Maya's monitor. With the power out, I'm just worried the unit in her room will die. Could you just go get it for me? I'd feel better." I had their spare key. "Sure, Lisa." "No problem," I said. "But, isn't Maya with you?" There was a half-second pause. Yes, of course. I worry about the camera. It's expensive. Please." It was weird, but I was bored and a little spooked by the storm myself. "Okay, I'll grab it." I unlocked their front door and stepped into the pitch-black house. The rain was hammering the roof, so hard it sounded like pebbles being thrown against the windows. I used my phone's flashlight to navigate, the beam cutting through the silent, dark living room. I went upstairs to the nursery. The receiver, the parent unit, was sitting on the changing table. I picked it up. The screen flickered to life, powered by its own internal battery. The night vision camera was still working. I glanced at the screen. It was pointed at Maya's crib. The crib was empty. "Thank God," I whispered to myself. They really did take her. I was about to turn the receiver off when a burst of sharp static hissed from the tiny speaker. And then the voice. That's when I heard it. My neighbor's baby monitor wasn't picking up crying. It was picking up an adult man's whisper, clearly reciting my home Wi-Fi password in Russian. Over and over. "Alpha Tango 9 Vostok 4. I froze. How did he know my password? I looked at the screen. In the grainy green and black image of the nursery, I saw the problem. The camera wasn't just pointing at the crib. It was pointed slightly to the right, angled perfectly at the window, which looked directly into my living room. My blood turned to ice. I dropped the monitor onto the plush carpet. As I bent to pick it up, the transmitter across the room, the camera unit itself, sitting on the dresser, crackled to life. A new voice came out of it. It was my voice. "Sure, Lisa. No problem. But, isn't Maya with you?" It was a recording. It was my side of the phone conversation I'd had 5 minutes ago. "You should not be listening." A man's voice suddenly boomed from the receiver in my hand. I looked up. A tall man stepped out of the deep shadow beside the nursery closet. He was thin, dressed in dark clothes. He was holding the camera, the transmitter, in his hand, pointing it at me like a microphone. He hadn't broken in. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. He lived here. He had been living here, in the attic, in the walls. Kevin and Lisa weren't just my neighbors. They were his cover, or his first victims. My mind instantly went to Lisa's strained voice on the phone. Was she even in Ohio? I screamed and ran. I threw myself out of the nursery, nearly falling down the stairs. I hit the bottom landing and scrambled for the front door. I was halfway across the entryway when he caught me. He was impossibly fast. He tackled me from behind, his weight slamming me onto the hard tile floor. The air flew out of my lungs. I felt the hardwood floor grate against my cheek as he pinned me. We had crashed right into the hall coat rack. It toppled over on us, a jumble of heavy coats, scarves, and umbrellas. He was on top of me, one hand clamped over my mouth, muffling my screams. His other hand was fumbling in his pocket. He pulled out a small roll of duct tape. "You are very nosy," he hissed, his accent thick. I was almost finished. He ripped a piece of tape off with his teeth and brought it toward my face. My free hand, trapped under the pile of coats, was flailing. My fingers brushed something cold and metal. A handle. It was their long, black golf umbrella. As he leaned over me, I gripped the handle, aimed the pointed end at his chest, and slammed the automatic open button. There was a violent thwomp and a sickening crack. The umbrella exploded open between us. The metal spokes, trapped by his own weight, jammed straight into his face and chest. He screamed, a high, wet, gurgling sound, and convulsed backward, clawing at the black fabric and broken metal ribs suddenly embedded in his cheek. He rolled off me. I didn't wait. I kicked and crawled out from under the coat rack, ripped the deadbolt open, and burst out into the storm, not stopping until I was inside my own locked house, dialing 911. The police found his nest in their attic. He'd been up there for weeks, maybe months. Food wrappers, water bottles, a sleeping bag, and a laptop wired directly into their home's electrical system, siphoning power and internet. The man was gone. By the time the police arrived, he had vanished back into the storm. They never found Kevin or Lisa or the baby. The police are treating it as a missing persons case, but I know they're not missing. They're gone. I just hope, for their sake, that they weren't in the house when he first decided to move in. My cat's collar, the one with the little silver bell, was just pushed out from under my bed. It was shoved by a pale, muddy, human hand that slid it across the hardwood to rest right beside my bare feet. This storm had been raging for 3 days. It was the same amount of time my cat, Biscuit, had been missing. I live on the ground floor of an older complex, but the unit was cheap and it had a small, fenced-in yard, which is why I'd moved in. I'd installed a cat flap in the back door a week ago, so Biscuit could come and go. Now, with the wind howling and the rain lashing against the glass, I was regretting it. I was worried sick, spending the night pacing, listening to the storm, and calling his name at the door. I was in the kitchen making my third cup of coffee, staring at the useless cat flap when I heard it. Thwack, thwack, thwack. The sound of the plastic flap hitting its frame. I assumed it was the wind, but the sound was wrong. It wasn't random. It was rhythmic. And the flap was swinging inward, as if something on the outside was tentatively pawing at it. My heart leaped. Biscuit? I ran over and knelt down. The flap was still. I unhooked the inner lock, a flimsy piece of plastic, and pushed the flap open. Nothing but the dark, flooded yard. I locked it again, my disappointment sharp. The thwacking stopped. It was replaced by a new sound. A slow, wet scraping noise. It wasn't the sound of cat claws. It was the sound of something harder, something duller. It sounded like fingernails being dragged down the plastic. A chill went through me. I stood up, backed away, and locked the main deadbolt on the kitchen door. I turned off the light and watched from the adjoining living room window. After a minute, I had a stupid idea. Maybe it was a person, maybe a homeless person was trying to get my attention. I grabbed the bag of cat food. I unlocked the deadbolt, quickly opened the door, threw a handful of dry kibble onto the patio, and slammed the door shut, locking it instantly. I ran back to the window, my heart pounding. For a long minute, nothing. Then, from the dense, wet shrubbery near the patio, a hand snaked out. It was pale, caked in mud, the nails long and dark. It didn't grope. It moved with purpose. It cupped a handful of the kibble, and just as quickly retreated back into the bushes. I couldn't breathe. I backed away from the window, fumbling for my phone to call the police. Then the scraping sound started again. Not at the kitchen door. It was coming from my bedroom. It was on my window. I crept down the short hall. The sound was loud now, a wet squeegeeing scrape. I stood in the doorway, paralyzed. Finally, I lunged forward and ripped the curtains open. A face was pressed against the glass, but it was just a smudge of dirt in the dark. As I watched, a hand came up and, using a finger, drew a long, slow, distorted smiley face in the mud on the glass. I screamed and stumbled backward, tripping over my own laundry basket and falling onto my bed. That's when I heard the crack from the kitchen, a loud, splintering sound like a bone breaking. I knew that flimsy plastic lock on the cat flap was broken. I knew it was inside. I didn't hear footsteps, just a soft, wet, shuffling sound. I scrambled off the bed and backed into the corner, grabbing my phone. My hands were shaking too hard to unlock it. I could see the dark hallway from my room. I saw the trail of muddy water and small, dark clumps of dirt leading from the kitchen, stopping right at my bedroom door. It was in the room with me. The shuffling sound had stopped. Silence. Just the rain. I held my breath, scanning the shadows. The closet. The curtains. Then I looked down. Under the bed. As if summoned by my gaze, something slid out from the darkness beneath the box spring. It wasn't the hand. It was Biscuit's blue collar, the one with the little silver bell. It chimed softly on the hardwood. My cat's collar, the one with the little silver bell, was just pushed out from under my bed. It was shoved by a pale, muddy, human hand that slid it across the hardwood to rest right beside my bare feet. The hand stayed there, palm down on my floor, fingers splayed. A part of my brain just broke. Primal terror took over. I grabbed the first thing I could reach, a heavy glass bottle of perfume on my dresser, and hurled it under the bed. It was met with a low, wet, guttural grunt. Not a human sound. Not an animal sound. A hand shot out and clamped around my ankle like a steel trap. I screamed as it pulled. I fell hard, my chin striking the floor. It was dragging me, its strength unbelievable, pulling me toward the darkness under the bed. I was clawing at the wooden floor, my fingers finding no purchase. I looked at my nightstand. The lamp. It was a heavy ceramic base. I couldn't reach the lamp itself, but I could reach its cord. I grabbed the thin wire with both hands and pulled. The lamp, my alarm clock, and a glass of water all crashed down. I didn't care. I kept pulling the lamp by its cord, dragging the heavy base closer until my fingers could wrap around it. The hand was still pulling me. I was halfway under the bed. I screamed, rolled onto my side, and swung the lamp with all my strength into the blackness where I thought a head should be. I was met with a dull, heavy thud. It felt like hitting a watermelon wrapped in wet leather. The hand on my ankle went limp. I kicked myself free, scrambling on all fours, and ran. I didn't stop. I ran out of my apartment, out of the building, and didn't stop running until I was in the middle of the flooded street, screaming for help under the rain. The police came. They searched the apartment. There was no one under the bed, but the carpet was soaked with muddy water and something else, something dark and thick, and the bed's dust ruffle was torn. Behind it, they found what I couldn't see, a small, square maintenance hatch in the floorboard, leading to the building's crawl space. It had been pried open from below. The landlord, when they called him, was hysterical. He swore that hatch hadn't been opened in 30 years. They found Biscuit the next morning, safe, dry, and angry, locked in my neighbor's garage. They never found the collar, and they never found the thing that had been wearing it. I was in the basement, pulling the heavy, wet clothes from the washing machine, when my fingers closed around something that wasn't fabric. It was a long, tangled, impossibly thick wad of black hair. As I pulled, it came free with a sickening, wet-ripping sound. It was still attached to a bloody piece of scalp. I hate this basement. I share this old rental house with my roommate, Sarah. It's cheap, but it's one of those houses full of weird, old-fashioned features. The worst one is the laundry chute. It's a rattling metal tube that runs from a small door in the upstairs bathroom all the way down to a wicker basket in this damp, concrete basement. Tonight, the storm was bad. The wind was making the house groan, and the rain was seeping in, making the basement smell like wet cement and mildew. I was just trying to get the laundry done before the power went out. I had just sorted my load when I heard it from upstairs, a sharp metallic slam. It was the sound of the laundry chute door in the bathroom being slammed shut. "Guess Sarah's finally doing her sheets," I muttered. A minute later, just as I was about to start my own load, a huge bundle of white fabric, bed sheets, definitely, tumbled out of the chute and landed in the wicker basket. "Perfect," I said, sarcasm thick in the air. "Guess I'll do yours first." I grabbed the bundle. They were heavy and they felt gritty. I dumped them into the washer drum, and the smell hit me. It wasn't the normal smell of dirty laundry. It wasn't sweat or perfume. It was a rank, coppery smell. Like rust. Like old, stagnant pond water. I wrinkled my nose but poured in the detergent and started the machine. The washer filled and began to agitate. But almost immediately, it started making a horrible sound. A heavy clunk-thud clunk-thud. It wasn't just off balance. It sounded like a boot was trapped inside. Cursing, I stopped the cycle. The water drained slowly. I opened the lid, expecting to see a balled-up sheet or maybe one of Sarah's sneakers. That's when my fingers found the hair. I dropped the bloody scalp to the concrete floor and threw up, a thin, sour bile splashing next to it. I was shaking, crying, staring at this thing. I looked up. I looked up at the square, dark opening of the laundry chute in the low ceiling above the washer. And as I watched, two hands grabbed the metal rim of the opening. They were pale, the skin waterlogged and wrinkled, the nails broken and black with grime. They gripped the edge, and then a head pushed its way into view. It was a woman. Her face was plastered, caked, in the same long, stringy black hair I had just pulled from the machine. She was trying to squeeze her shoulders through the narrow opening. I screamed. It was a thin, whistling sound. She couldn't have come from the bathroom. The chute was maybe 10 inches wide. It was impossible. She stopped trying to squeeze and just let go. She fell, dropping the 4 feet from the ceiling with a wet, heavy thud, landing on top of the washing machine. She stood up, her bones cracking. She was wearing what looked like a tattered, soaked nightgown. She opened her mouth and a stream of rusty, foul-smelling water poured out. She made a sound, a high, gurgling, drowning click. I scrambled backward, but my back hit the concrete wall. She was between me and the wooden staircase, the only way out. She took a step toward me, her bare feet slapping the wet floor. My eyes darted around. Panic. I needed anything. On the shelf next to the washer, next to the bleach, was the giant, economy-sized box of powdered laundry detergent. She lunged. I didn't think. I grabbed the heavy cardboard box, ripped the perforated top open, and threw the entire cloud of fine, white powder into her face. It was a direct hit. The woman stopped, inhaling the powder. She didn't cough. She convulsed. She let out a dry, rattling shriek and clawed at her face, the powder turning into a thick, white paste as it mixed with the water dripping from her hair. She was blinded. I didn't wait. I bolted past her, feeling the icy cold of her wet nightgown brush my arm. I took the wooden stairs 3 at a time, burst into the kitchen, and slammed the heavy basement door shut. I threw the deadbolt and then, sobbing, dragged the refrigerator in front of it. Sarah came downstairs, sleepy, asking what the hell I was doing. She'd been in her room, headphones on, streaming a movie. She swore she hadn't been near the bathroom, hadn't touched the laundry chute. The police came. They moved the fridge. They opened the door. The basement was empty. The pile of sheets was gone. The bloody scalp was gone. The washer, when they opened it, was empty. Except for one thing. A few long, black hairs were still hopelessly tangled in the central agitator. They searched the house. They found nothing. But one of the cops, a young guy, shined his flashlight up the laundry chute from the basement. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. I asked him what he saw. He just shook his head. But I saw it later, when I went back with the landlord. The inside of the metal tube, for its entire 20-foot length, was covered in deep, parallel scratch marks. The kind someone would make with their fingernails trying to climb up. The woman stood with her back to me, rubbing her hair with my towel. But the movement was stiff, mechanical, a jerky back and forth sawing motion, like she was trying to twist her own head clean off her neck. That was hours after I made the mistake. It all started around midnight. Mark, my husband, was in Chicago for a conference. I was alone in our house, which sits at the very end of a quiet dead-end street. The rain hadn't stopped for 2 days. The TV was blaring flood warnings, telling everyone to stay off the roads. The creek at the end of our street had already breached its banks, and the water was creeping up our driveway. I was just glad I was safe inside, warm, with the doors locked. Then came the knocking. It wasn't a polite tap. It was a frantic, desperate pounding that cut right through the sound of the storm. I flipped on the porch light. Through the peephole I saw her. A young woman, maybe in her early 20s, completely drenched. She looked like a drowned rat, shivering, her face pale with panic. I opened the door, leaving the security chain latched. "My car," she stuttered, her teeth chattering so hard I could barely understand her. "It stalled in the water at the intersection. My phone, it's dead, it's soaked." She held it up, a useless black rectangle. "Please, can I just use your phone? I need to call my friend." Against my better judgment, against everything Mark always told me about living on a dead-end street, I unhooked the chain. "Just stay here in the entryway," I said, trying to be firm. "I'll get you a towel and the cordless phone." I handed them to her. She turned her back to me, facing the wall, and started dialing. She mumbled into the phone, her voice too low to hear over the rain. I grabbed another dry towel from the hall closet, keeping an eye on her. She hung up. "No answer," she whispered, still facing the wall. "He must be asleep." She turned around. "Please," she said, her voice dropping. Can I just wait on your sofa for a little while? Until the rain lets up. I'm so cold." This was the moment I should have said no. This was the moment I should have told her to wait on the porch. But I looked at her, and she just seemed so pathetic. She gave me a small, trembling smile. But her eyes, they were flat. Empty. There was no fear in them. Just nothing. "I'll get you a blanket," I said, stalling. I walked back toward the linen closet, which meant passing the kitchen. And that's when I saw it. She had dripped water all over the tile floor. But it wasn't the muddy, brown water that was currently flooding the street. The puddle was perfectly clear. And the smell, it was sharp, acidic. It was the overwhelming, chemical smell of chlorine. A cold spike of adrenaline shot through my chest. That wasn't rain. That was pool water. I left the blanket. I walked slowly back into the living room. She wasn't in the entryway anymore. She was standing in the dim light of the living room, in front of the wall where I keep our family photos. Mark and me at the Grand Canyon. My sister's wedding. She had the towel I gave her, draped over her head, and she was drying her hair. That's when I saw it. The woman stood with her back to me, rubbing her hair with my towel. But the movement was stiff, mechanical, a jerky back and forth sawing motion, like she was trying to twist her own head clean off her neck. Are you okay?" My voice came out as a squeak. The movement stopped. She let the towel fall to the floor. She turned around very, very slowly. Her face was wrong. Her jaw was hanging open, dislocated, twisted horribly to the side as if it had been broken. When she spoke, it wasn't a voice. It was the sound of her teeth clacking together, like wet stones. He, clack clack, doesn't clack, like it when I cry. She wasn't a victim. She was wrong. I screamed, "Get out of my house." She lunged. It wasn't a run. Her limbs moved in a way that didn't make sense, an uncoordinated, sprawling motion, like she was swimming through the air. She was impossibly fast. I turned and ran for the back door, the one that led to the patio. My hand hit the deadbolt, I ripped it open, and a wall of brown, churning water met me. The flood was already 3 feet deep against the house. I was trapped. She was on me. Her cold, wet hands grabbed my hair, pulling me back. I stumbled, falling into the small home gym area Mark had set up by the window. I felt her weight on me, pushing me down, her fingers digging into my scalp. My hand, flailing, hit something hard and metal. The 5-pound dumbbell. I didn't think. I just grabbed it, rolled over, and swung it with all my strength. There was a wet, heavy thud. I hit her square in the side of the head. She collapsed sideways, her head hitting the control panel of the treadmill, which beeped absurdly. I scrambled to my feet, vaulted over the sofa, and ran up the stairs. I slammed my bedroom door, locked it, and shoved my heavy oak dresser in front of it, the wood scraping horribly against the floor. Then I got in the closet with my cell phone and dialed 911, my hands shaking so bad I could barely press the numbers. It took the police almost an hour to get to me. They had to use a high-water rescue vehicle. I stayed on the line with the dispatcher, listening to the dresser rattling as something slammed against it from the other side. Then, about 10 minutes before the flashing blue and red lights finally cut through my window, the banging stopped. They escorted me down the stairs, wading through the knee-deep water in my own living room. The living room was empty. The front door was wide open, floodwater pouring in. The woman was gone. The 5-pound dumbbell was gone. The only thing she left behind was the smell of chlorine, so strong it burned my nose and overpowered the stench of the sewer water. One of the officers, doing a perimeter check with a flashlight, called out from the backyard. "Ma'am," he said, his voice strained. "Is this your towel?" He was standing by our backyard pool. The rain had overflowed it, turning it into a murky, overflowing mess. Floating on the surface, right near the deep end, was the towel I had given her.